Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
The number one thing that contributes to customer loyalty is emotions. So move onward and upward faster by gaining significantly deeper insight and understanding of your customer journey and personas with emotional intelligence. With your empathy mapping workshop, you'll learn how to evoke and influence the right customer emotions that generate improved customer loyalty and reduce your cost to operate. Get over your emotional hump now by going to empathymapping.com to learn more. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I have somebody on the show today that's going to help us with something that probably all of us have an issue with. And that's those bad bosses and crazy coworkers and other office idiots that drive us nuts. Vicky Oliver was born and raised in New York City. She grew up as an only child. Her parents were divorced when she was young. Then her mom remarried. Vicky's mother, father, and stepfather were all in advertising, which was Vicky's first career. Her family talked about advertising at the dinner table. Vicky initially didn't want to go into advertising, but she did want to write. She started writing poems at the age of 6. She was even asked to start the school newspaper at one of her schools. By 17, Vicky was writing in-depth journalistic pieces for a newspaper that was free and could be found in the lobbies of buildings. Vicky Oliver started her career life as a receptionist in advertising and then was promoted to secretary. After that, she was promoted to junior copywriter. Eventually, Vicky became a creative director. At a certain point, she wondered, what else could she write besides ads and TV spots that were making her clients rich? Vicky noticed that she had a lot of jobs in advertising and also always managed to secure good ones. Once Vicky started hiring people for herself, she began to think about a book on job hunting, mainly because a lot of candidates made mistakes. She thought they showed up late, didn't know my name, didn't know the clients we have. I should write a book about this. And then one day she did. Vicky Oliver is a leading career development expert and the multi-best-selling author of 5 books, including Bad Bosses, Crazy Coworkers, and Other Office Idiots. She's a sought-after speaker and seminar presenter and a popular media source, having made over 700 appearances in broadcast, print, and online outlets. Vicky currently resides in Manhattan, basically 30 blocks from where she grew up. Vicky Oliver, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad you're here. I've given our Legion a little bit about you, but can you tell us what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
I really like to help people, both who are looking for work and also help people survive their workplaces. I do that by writing articles, writing books, speaking out about it, giving seminars, and also I run a small consulting practice here in Manhattan where job candidates come and talk to me in person.
So when you start thinking about, all of those things that you're doing, where do you find that you get the most passion?
I get the most passion. I feel like I'm a writer first and foremost, and I like to set my thoughts down in words first. But then once I feel like I've found the path, like the problem and the solution and kind of figured out how to solve something, then I like to meet people in person and do it that way.
So that makes sense. And, one of the things, that I also noticed in the book is, the way that you have it. The end of the book, is the thing for me that had the most meat, because I definitely like the whole, focusing on self, being aware of self. It's what we talk about in emotional intelligence, because, when we can do that, then we can start really making some changes, for the better. And one of the things that you said in towards the back of the book to me I think was a gem. You said, if you're considering leaving your job to run away from that particular person, a boss, a colleague, an underleague, or even someone in a different department, who drives you crazy, rest assured, you will encounter the identical problem elsewhere.
Yes. I feel that the grass is not greener in another company. If you have difficulty working for the quote unquote devil wears Prada, then you're going to have difficulty working for her at another company. Some people, for whatever reason, drive us nuts. My mother is I love you, Mom, but my mother is very autocratic. When I was working in advertising, I had difficulty working for extremely autocratic people. They reminded me of my mother, who was also in advertising, right? So That's the type that drives me nuts. Somebody else, the person that drives them nuts is the guy that's never there. They need their boss's permission. He's never around. They're chasing him all over the country and maybe even to Europe. Can't find him, can't do anything because he's not there. There are different personality types that drive different people crazy for different reasons. And the idea of my book was to mark all of those personality types. I think there are about 40 or something in the book. Then, as a reader, figure out who is driving me crazy today. Go look up some proactive tips on what to do with that person, how to deal with them, and then put the book away for another day. It's a thesaurus of all the people who can drive you crazy, and here's what you can do about that.
Well, and I think the fallacy is that people think that they can escape those people, that environment, and that's not always the case. And the fact is that it could damage you in your career in the long term.
Correct. You can escape a person, but you cannot escape that type of person. If it drives you crazy for someone to be looking over your shoulder, looking over your to-do lists, micromanaging you, if that type of person drives you crazy, that type of person is always going to drive you crazy until you learn how to conquer that personality type. And once you learn to conquer that personality type, they will no longer drive you crazy. Now, let's look at the opposite way. Let's say, I'm going to escape that person. I'm going to go to company B now, and then that personality type will still be there driving me crazy. Now I'm going to hop to company C, right? What happens? Well, usually in a job hop, you get a little more money when you hop. So your finances will improve slightly. However, you lose a great deal too, because you have lost the time you put in to pay your dues at those companies. You have lost the trust because you keep job hopping. You have lost a lot in your career by doing it that way. And a lot of times you will not advance as far if you keep job hopping. You will not advance as far as if you stay at a place and you learn how to conquer some personality types and you grow within the company. Usually growing within a company is your best strategy for career advancement, not job hopping.
That's a really good point. I mean, because of the thing that, I see where, people end up really starting to hit their flow is when they've, really focused in on something and gained some subject matter expertise within it. And then they're recognized and appreciated for that depth of expertise. And then that is what allows them to, get, the jobs of greater responsibility and even greater pay instead of that little bump. But if you can't deal with these different types of personalities, you're essentially just kissing all of that goodbye.
You are. It's a real issue. And I think that a lot of people, especially not to paint, a whole generation with a wide brush, but especially the millennial generation, I think that is not something that young people are thinking about today. They don't think in terms of my whole career. They just think in terms of this job, this position. I think that's a mistake. I really do. So it's better often to learn how to deal with that personality. Also, a lot of times if you have a problem with somebody at the office, they have a problem with you. And their problem with you may be making them look for work elsewhere. So by resolving to stay, try to conquer it, and then if necessary, make them leave, a lot of times that is a way of getting yourself promoted. Like if the person is your boss and you don't get along with the person, but you try really hard, you try and you try and you try, and then eventually that person leaves, there's a space for you to move into.
Well, that's a good point, except that when you start thinking about, that next step of responsibility or that higher step of responsibility, at some point, you're still going to have to learn how to deal with those different personalities, because the reality is if you build a team of people who you can only get along with, you're cutting out a huge opportunity to gain benefit from having a diverse team.
Yes.
You're only going to have people that essentially function a particular way or think a particular way, and you essentially put yourself into the downsides of what was, the groupthink, negative side.
Yes, I think that's actually an excellent point. A lot of times people do hire people, who remind them of themselves and who are basically duplicating their strengths. And so you end up with these lopsided teams, which are very strong in certain key areas, but exceptionally weak in other areas. Whereas if you master different personalities, that will not be a factor. That will not be a factor for you. You will be able to organize teams and think about team building in a different way, where you are basically using people's strengths. If you're strong in certain areas, you should hire people who are strong in other areas than yourself, so that you have more of a balance.
That it also brings up the point, and then you and I had talked about this before, where there's really, a difference between managing and leading. And we may have many years ago been able to get away with not having skills in both particular areas because we had, so many different, levels and hierarchies within organizations, but all that's thinned out. So now I have to build skills in both.
Right. You do. And I just want to quickly sort of talk a little bit about what at least I think the differences are, right? So for me, management is something that is process oriented. It's task oriented, but that is not leadership. Leadership is a certain skill set where you are literally inspiring the people around you to greatness. Now, you can be the boss, and hopefully you are, trying to inspire your people to greatness, but you can also do it from a mid-level position. But the point is, leadership is a privilege, and a privilege means you have to have buy-in from the people that you lead. So you might be a boss and you might have 20 people underneath you, but if they're not buying into your vision and what you see for the company, they are not going to extend themselves for you. They're not going to take risks for you.
You bring up a really interesting point. And for me on the Fast Leader Show, I kind of try to always pull things back to the customer experience and talk about customer-centric leadership. And so when I start thinking about leadership and talking about all the people who you're focusing in on today, how much is that customer experience aspect come into play with all the work that you're doing versus, say, just a few years ago?
I think you always have to be customer centric. I mean, a company always has to be thinking about the end person. That's really critical. And a lot of times just feedback mechanisms that you can build in will help you figure out what the customer experience is. And that is really essential. But what I'm talking about here is leading a group, a company, to become better at what it is that they do. And part of that is just being able to take risks and inspiring people to take risks and not being so frightened sometimes if a risk fails.
Well, when we start talking about all of this and dealing with all of these people, whether we get along with them or not, it's loaded with passion. And one of the things that we look at on the show in order to be able to energize us are quotes. Is there a quote or two that you can share that you like?
Well, I've always liked leadership as a privilege. I just think that's a great quote. And I also really like, and it's sort of the opposite almost, but I also have always really liked the Woody Allen quote, like 50% or maybe it's 80% of life is showing up, right? And I think that sometimes 80% of life is showing up. And that doesn't mean just showing up and going through the motions necessarily. But for example, I think it's interesting to think about in today's environment with flex hours, people working more from home. Sometimes it's better to show up in person and be there. Sometimes it's better to not skip the meeting, show up, be there, get enthused, have a group discussion about your goals so that you can all be more productive together.
That's a really good point. There was something, a study that I was reading the other day, talking about the workplace and saying how one of the key factors, in this whole engagement component, and you even, talked about it a moment ago, is kind of in line with that whole concept of privilege as a leader, is the whole appreciation component. Right. And when you were talking about the just show up, to me, I started thinking about people kind of see that as an appreciation.
Yeah. I mean, there's showing up and there's showing up, right? So one of the things I talk about, and especially in terms of job hunting, but I think it's appropriate here too, is being mentally present, right? So if you are a job interviewee and you show up, but you are sitting there in the reception area on your cell phone, on your mobile device, texting your friends while you're waiting, you are not mentally present. If you're in an in-person meeting at a company and you're texting your wife, hey, what are we having for dinner? You are not mentally present. And showing up and going through the motions, that's not what I'm talking about. You should show up and really put your cell phone on vibrate and don't look at it. Don't look at it. You're there to have an in-person interaction with the people that you're working with. And I think that will go further in terms of your team goals than just showing up and sort of shuffling through the motions.
So when you were talking, I started thinking about this whole bad bosses, crazy coworkers, and other office idiots, and how much, your own mental presence has to play in all of that.
It does. It really does. To just show up, in terms of maybe 30, 40 years ago, people could sort of show up and just go through the motions. That's not going to work today because they've gotten rid of all these middle layers. So everybody has to sort of be there and be really super pumped and do 3 jobs, You have to lead, you have to manage, and you have to be the mailroom guy. You're doing 3 jobs when you're there. So you have to be really mentally present.
Well, and you can't do all that stuff well if you're a job hopper, right?
I think you can do it well, but I think the problem is the other people. So if you job hop and then you go to a new company, those people, especially, some old timer who has paid their dues for 20 years, they're not going to give you the great assignments. They're not going to give you the plum assignments, on day one. You may want them and you may feel like you deserve them, but you're not going to get them. You have to build a level of trust within the other people in the company. They have to see that you're a good team player, that you have great ideas, that you're enthusiastic, that you work late and hard, all those values, that you have them. And it's going to take you a while to build that kind of credibility. That's the problem. They're not going to give it to you on day one. You're going to have to put in another year. So just think of that every time you say, you know what, I hate this person at the office and he's driving me nuts. I got to leave. Do you really have to go? Or could you tame him, train him, work with him, discuss it as an issue, make peace with that person, make peace with his imperfections and his foibles, and work together so that the year you've just put in counts, and it counts towards your future advancement.
So it's easy, I think, to pick on, a particular, group of people. Oftentimes we talk about, managing millennials and all that because, they want the corner job, today, and then they get frustrated because they can't get it. However, when I was younger, I kind of had that same mindset. I'm like, hey, give me the opportunities based off of my performance, not, because there's some concept in your mind that I have to pay a dues. So how does one learn how to do what you had said in the book, which is, have patience, learn how to practice these things and persevere?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you learn it, but I think it's just a helpful mindset to try to get into it. I'm thinking back. This is kind of, you want to know personal story. I think this is kind of a funny story. When I first started in advertising as a receptionist, I was dating somebody at the time, and I think he was more embarrassed about the fact that I was like so low on the totem pole at this place, right, than I was. And we would run into friends of mine in New York, in Manhattan, where I live, and he would be like, "Oh, she's an account executive. She's an account executive. Vicky's an account executive." Meanwhile, I was a receptionist, right? So I know I had a little impatience back then, also, but you just have to say that some people there have worked very, very, very hard and long to rise. And other people are superstars maybe, and they've worked a little faster, but no matter how it goes, you want to do the best job you can do every day. And it's sort of about being mentally present in the present, to say, okay, even if this is a low level job that I'm at and it's not that exciting, it's not that mentally challenging, I'm going to do the best job I can do today at this task because I'm mentally present. I'm here in the present. I'm not here plotting my future 25 years from now. I'm here right now. And if you do that every day and you just do the best job you can, that minute, that second, that day, people will recognize you, and it will happen faster for you probably than if you're sitting there like, oh, how come they haven't promoted me? I've been here for 3 months. Because that kind of attitude will get some people very, very annoyed at you. Like the person hired you, right? They hired you to do a task. And here you are saying, get me out of this task. I can't stand it. I'm too smart for this. They're not going to like you, and they're not going to want you to succeed. So sometimes you just have to put your future aspirations a little bit on the back burner and do the actual job you were hired to do, which usually comes down to solving problems. So you always want to be like a person that solves a problem and is not creating a problem.
I think that's a great point. Okay, so you kind of talked a little bit about that time where you've, may have learned, something, and those are important things for us. So, when you start thinking about getting over, a hump, and it became, something that, was really something that you could learn from, and it helped you change a particular course of direction for the better. Can you tell us that time?
Well, I know that in New York City, around the time of September 11th, 2001, when there was a terrible terrorist attack here in New York, and I was in Manhattan, and I was working at an ad agency at the time. And then a few months later, there were all these articles that came out about people switching their careers. And because it was a giant wake-up call in general, I would say, and for everybody, and especially here in New York City, a huge, huge, terrible wake-up call where we suddenly realized, like, oh, tomorrow we may die. And for me, I said to myself, and this was it was like a year-long process after that day, but I said to myself, I'm a really good writer, but I'm not sure if I want to die just making big corporations wealthy. Maybe I could use my skills to either make me wealthy or make other people wealthy, but not huge, huge companies. It was like a redirect. And for me, I just started to take a lot of writing classes. Like I took screenwriting classes, and I took fiction writing classes, and I took journalism classes. I took all these classes at night because I was in advertising, working, as a copywriter / creative director during the day, writing ad copy. And I just began to say, what else can I write? Like, obviously, I know how to write, but what else should I be writing? What should I be using my writing skills for? And for me, it was a huge redirect. And then for me, I started writing articles about advertising first. And I was, because you have to get some credentials to be that kind of a writer. And then I began thinking, I've always wanted to write this book on job hunting. Maybe I should do that. So I think sometimes something is so shocking that you just wake up and you're like, oh my God, I have to change my course of life. And that's why I began writing that kind of a book that I began writing.
Well, I'm glad you did because I really appreciated. I mean, the subtitle of this book is 201 Smart Ways to Handle the Toughest People Issues, and just like you said, it's a good reference point reference book that I think we can learn a lot of things from and don't have to necessarily try to absorb it all at one time. Okay, so we talk about there's another book book that I'm sure that you're working on. You're doing the coaching. You're doing different work with other people. But when you start looking at all of those things, what's one of your goals?
Well, I think my big goal I haven't reached yet. I would like to have a radio show. That's my goal. I've been on the radio about 500 times, but I would like to have my own radio show. I don't mean through, a podcast necessarily. I mean like a real traditional radio show. That's one of my goals. I haven't gotten there yet.
Well, the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that improves the empathy and emotional intelligence skills in everyone. It provides a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement and provides integrated activities that will improve the leadership and collaboration skills in everyone. This award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and higher-performing employees that have great working relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Vicky, the Hump Day Hoedown is a part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Vicky Oliver, are you ready to hoedown?
I hope so.
All right. So what do you think is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Sometimes you just have to figure out the path. Like I want a radio show. I don't know how to do it. So I have to figure out the path. I think if you figure out the path, you get further.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
I think one can learn a lot from Dale Carnegie. I know it's old-fashioned, but I went there and I took the Dale Carnegie course on public speaking. And I think if you learn how to listen well and also be a good speaker, you will go far.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I'm extremely organized. And in fact, sometimes I think I should write a book about organizational skills, like how to be an organized person. I deal with lists. I stick with my list. I do everything on my list. That's it. Just write a list and do it.
What do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I think this may sound vague, but I have a depth of experience now because I have dealt with people and I've heard their problems and I've conquered some of my problems. And so eventually I think you develop kind of a repository of wisdom. And what I want to try to do is share my repository of wisdom with people.
What would be one book that you'd recommend to our listeners? They could be from any genre. And of course, we're going to put a link to Bad Bosses, Crazy Coworkers, and Other Office Idiots on your show notes page as well.
Okay, thank you. So, since I am talking about Dale Carnegie, I would say How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think Dale Carnegie wrote that in 1933, if I'm not mistaken. And I still think it's very cogent, pertinent advice. Another book I would recommend, which we were talking about earlier, is the book Emotional Intelligence. I think those 2 volumes are fantastic.
Okay, Fast Leader listeners, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Vicky Oliver. Okay, Vicky, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you've been given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take everything back. You can only choose one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
I'd say that sometimes you do actually have to say to yourself, take a risk. Like I know that when I was in college, I wanted to write self-help books, the kind of books I write now, but I didn't know how to do it, how to begin. And if I had started then, I'd have more in my library that I'd written now.
Vicky, it was an honor to spend time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Okay, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And you can reach me at vicky@vickyoliver.com, and it's VICKY.
Vicky Oliver, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.